Welcome to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry channel. Maynard Edwards here, along with Chris Ruli, and behind me, Brother Matt Bowers, voice of the Scottish Rite Journal podcast. And speaking of Scottish Rite Journal, the managing editor of the Scottish Rite Journal, Brother Mark Dreisonstok, is behind us. We are on our way to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to literally celebrate, I guess, the 250th anniversary of the country and top Masonic sites in Philadelphia. And there are a bunch. Thanks for joining us on this trip to the city of brotherly love, and we would love it if you show us some love by subscribing. We really appreciate it. As Masons traveling to Philadelphia, it's only natural we start by visiting the Grand Lodge.
Gorgeous building. It was not the first Grand Lodge building.
No.
So there was a Masonic building, I think it was on Chestnut Street. It burned down, unfortunately, and the new building is built, and that's the one that's right next to the City Hall. I mean,
It is.
It's a great location.
The beautiful Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania is so full of Masonic history and symbolism, you'll have to stay tuned later this year for a full video dedicated to this amazing Masonic building. Our next stop, though, is the epicenter of American independence, the old Pennsylvania State House, better known as Independence Hall. Behind us is Independence Hall, where some of the most significant events in American history took place. The signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776, except it wasn't July 4th that it took place.
July 2nd.
No.
July 3rd.
No.
July 4th.
No. We've been over this. So July 2nd, they voted to ratify independence and said, yes, we're definitely seceding from England. We're done with them. July 3rd and the beginning of the 4th, they start fighting over the language of the Declaration of what exactly the letter is going to say.
Naturally.
And the evening of the July 4th, they decide, yes, this is exactly what we're going to say. They vote to ratify the language of the Declaration of Independence. Then that night, a guy named John Dunlap, he was a printer and his office was over there. We don't even know how many he printed. Some of them went to the newspaper publishers, some of them went to the delegates, some of them went to wherever they could go to get the news spread. It wasn't until August 2nd that everybody signed the document, and then there were still about 6 guys who didn't sign it until much, much later. So
here's a question for you.
yeah,
How many Masons signed the Declaration of Independence that we know of?
that we can absolutely prove through verifiable actual documentation. It's either 8 or 9. There is one that, if you believe a very long-standing tradition in Georgia, then he was a member of a lodge. It's written at his home, and it is, but we don't have lodge minutes that verify it.
Right.
The rest of those 8, we have either lodge minutes or lodge records that verify he either was entered, passed, and raised, like in the case of John Hancock. Ben Franklin, we know when he was entered, passed, and raised. We've got that information.
Or they served in committees, they attended meetings.
Exactly.
We have verifiable evidence that says
exactly. Now, there are some sources that say as many as 31. Some say 18. I am comfortable with 9. I am willing to accept the Georgia. And if you want to know, right now at mastercraftsmancollege.org, any Master Mason can take this course. There's a course all about the 9 Masonic signers of the Declaration of Independence. And then there's another course about the signers of the Constitution who were also Freemasons. So check that out. I don't want to give away the answer, so check it out on your own. It's a lot of fun course, and it's inexpensive and part of our suite of Americanism courses, which Chris's course, the White House and the Freemasons, is a part of it. Check it out at mastercraftsmancollege.org. But the answer that I'm comfortable with is 9.
I'll take 9.
9 is good.
That's good. 9
you
is
want to
good.
go visit Ben Franklin's grave?
Let's come check it out.
All right. Brother Ben Franklin is laid to rest in Christ Church Burial Ground, only a few hundred yards from Independence Hall, where he signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. His grave is visible even when the cemetery is closed, and passers-by still leave pennies on his grave for good luck, as an homage to his famous saying, "A penny saved is a penny earned," though Ben Franklin never actually wrote that sentence. The actual quote is, "A penny saved is 2 pence clear." Also laid to rest at Christ Church Burial Ground is another Mason who signed the Declaration of Independence, Joseph Hughes of New Jersey, and Brother John Dunlap, who again printed the Declaration of Independence. Not far from Christ Church Burying Ground is, as you'd expect, Christ Church.
When we came here, I wanted to make sure we hit this spot because this is cool. So one of the reasons why I really like this spot is we talk about George Washington a lot. And we sometimes joke that we don't really have a lot of stuff with George Washington participating in Masonic activities. Not in this case, because actually there's a famous depiction of Washington coming here for a Masonic event. For St. John's Day, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania.
December or June?
December 27th.
Okay, so
1788, I believe. This is after the war. He's president of the United States. He's actually in town, and they're going to celebrate St. John's Day. This is an annual event. There was a big march that came from the Masonic Temple down to the space. I think there was several hundred Masons that processed in the march, and George Washington agreed to come and participate in that event.
if you're coming to Philadelphia as part of the 250th and you want to do sort of a Masonic tour, Christ Church absolutely has to be
go
on your
it's
stop.
Mandatory.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a beautiful church. Just a little tidbit, a little travel tidbit here. If you pay the very small admittance fee, which is $5 up the street and $5 here, you get a little bit of a discount if you go to both. So we paid $5 at the burial ground and then $3 here. Well, yeah, you got to go to both. But that's right. That's on the main drag of everything. So people will hit that. But you know, it's worth the walk of about 4 blocks to come here and check this out.
And if it's on a nice day, it's a great
That's beautiful.
walk.
Beautiful. Our next stop has a disputed Masonic connection thanks to our favorite movie, National Treasure.
On George Washington's birthday that the final expansion of the crack occurred, retiring the Liberty Bell permanently. Eventually, it was moved from its place in Independence Hall steeple and given its own...
Who?
Any questions?
Me? It's not here.
Yes. As a matter of fact, the bell...
It's there now. Come on.
There it is. Long before it was associated with liberty, this was just the State House bell. Pennsylvania ordered it in 1751 to mark 50 years since William Penn received the charter for what would become Pennsylvania. They wanted a bell to call lawmakers and townspeople together, and they chose a verse from Leviticus for the inscription, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land." The bell came from London and it cracked at its very first test ring in Philadelphia. 2 local men stepped in to repair it, John Pass and John Stowe. They melted the broken bell down and recast it, but it sounded awful, so they recast it again. Their signatures are still on the bronze, Pass and Stowe, 1753. It's often repeated that they are Masons, but that legend is absolutely unproven, no matter what Benjamin Gates says. However, there is a cool Masonic connection. Andrew McNair was the keeper of the bell and a master Mason. And when the people of Philadelphia gathered to hear the first reading of the Declaration of Independence in July of 1776, it was Brother Andrew McNair who rang the bell to signal American independence. So it's not necessarily the most Masonic thing in the world, but still a very cool artifact that you kind of have to see when you come to Philadelphia. The first purpose-built Masonic Lodge in Philadelphia was built along a stretch of road known as Lodge Alley. Now, this is not Lodge Alley. It's very near where Lodge Alley was, which would have been at 2nd and Chestnut Streets in the Old City. So it would have been right very close to where we are right now. This is just kind of a random alley, but it was very much like this one where there were entrances along the way. And the Masonic Lodge was along one of these entrances. And if you were to walk out here, you would be very close to where Christ Church is and a lot of other sites are downtown. So this is very similar to a Lodge Alley in Charleston, which also has a Lodge Alley. And we've talked a little bit about how there is that confluence between Philadelphia and Charleston when it comes to the Scottish Rite, because very near to where we are right now here at Lodge Alley is the former home, or was the former home, of Colonel John Mitchell, quartermaster, deputy quartermaster of the Revolutionary Army, but also first Grand Commander of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite at Charleston. So we're going to go visit his house in a few minutes, but just imagine, if you will, the colonial and the early patriot Freemasons would have walked in an alley just like this to get to Lodge. The street we're on right now is Front Street, and we're just north of Chestnut. And John Mitchell, our first Grand Commander, his home was 6 houses north of Chestnut. As you can tell, Front Street is right next to I-95. So that's what you hear in the background. Also, pretty important, is about 100 yards that way would have been the original location of the Tun Tavern, which is now under I-95. We're not going to go there.
We can try.
We're not going to try. But interesting again that the connection between Philadelphia and Charleston is here. John Mitchell was a merchant. You can find newspaper ads where he was selling stuff, and he would sell it out of his house right along this stretch right here. While he was in Philadelphia, he was a merchant, and that's when he got involved in the revolution as the deputy quartermaster general.
That's right.
This house is probably not really where Betsy Ross lived. She probably lived in a house that was next door to this one, and it's no longer here. She probably also didn't sew the first American flag. That was family lore that got passed down and somehow became codified in our American zeitgeist, if you will.
Sure,
it just became
sure.
part of our legend in the same way that Washington's cherry tree
That's right.
became a legend. She didn't design it. She probably sewed flags, but not the Betsy Ross flag as we all know it. And the grave over there very well may not be the mortal remains of Betsy Ross, because when she died originally, she was buried in a family plot in sort of a group setting. And then many years later, when they decided to do something special for Betsy, they exhumed what they thought were most likely her bones and put them here. So it very well may not be her. Her husband, John Claypool, very likely was a Mason.
Interesting. Why is it likely?
Because we don't have we have other people have said that he was a Mason, but we don't have that concrete proof that we've talked about in the past. But that's what I wanted to talk to you about, is when we're talking about Masonic history, when we're talking about U.S. history, when we're talking about history in general,
Right.
a lot of times we get wrapped up in these stories that are anecdotal and get passed down for so long that the facts are blurred and the story has no resemblance to the actual truth. So what do we need to look for when we're doing Masonic research or research in the United States, research in our lodges? What is concrete proof that someone was a Mason and or participated in some kind of an event?
Yeah. We sort of boil those things or catalog those things into what we call primary sources. So proceedings, lodge minutes, transactions. I'll even take newspaper bulletins and saying, the lodge attended a cornerstone ceremony in 1799, and here are the following people that were involved. We may not necessarily have perfect minutes, but sometimes newspaper records, diaries, those sort of things help supply that information. And oftentimes, researchers are often triangulating, saying, well, we sort of know the person was here in this city, we sort of have these other references, and so we sort of can come together and say, maybe this was the case. And so oftentimes that's what researchers are looking for.
So when we're doing writing, when we're producing a piece for maybe social media, we need to be careful to make sure we note that it's likely that, as opposed to it's definite that. Like again, Ben Franklin, we know he was a Mason. We've got the information when he was entered, passed, and raised. We've got lodge minutes.
But how do we know that? Because we've got lodge minutes, we've got letters, we've got documentation from him, the primary source, talking about Freemasonry. And then secondary sources are the publishing, the things that he printed, the notices that he printed, the documents from other Masons who can verify and claim that here he was.
And so would you then, how do we handle something, say like a letter where one brother has written and says, I was in a lodge with brother so-and-so, are we counting that? Because that's anecdotal still. I mean,
that's anecdotal, but it qualifies to me as a decent primary resource if we do not have any other documentation.
Okay, so
and again, this is all history. History is, unfortunately, we claim that it's set in stone. It's actually quite fluid. It changes.
We learn new things
when we have new pieces of information. So oftentimes we get the reverse, which is we never knew this person was a Freemason, but then all of a sudden we find a letter in some research society or historical society that helps us unveil more information.
Just because a story isn't necessarily true doesn't take away from the power it has for us. So the story that I like to point out that we know isn't true but still kind of important to the American story, if you will, is George Washington and the cherry tree. Father, I chopped down the cherry tree, I can't tell a lie. Still has something to teach us. Betsy Ross teaches us about the role that women did play in helping to shape our young nation.
Absolutely.
And things like that. And her husband being a Mason gives us a little bit of a Masonic connection here. So absolutely. I think they still have value, but when we have to sort of separate the stories from the actual history.
Yeah, and I think to me, the history is very good when you're doing research, but when you're trying to tell a story, when you're trying to share something, it doesn't necessarily need to be out of a publication or a research journal. Sometimes these stories have value, just like how the symbols that we have value. The symbols themselves may be just an item or an artifact, but what those symbols represent tell us a little bit more about an ideal, a principle, a value. And so these stories tell us more about George Washington's character. While we may not have other stories, those examples give us examples about his character, his values, the things that he found important.
So as you're looking at your lodge history and we look at the celebration of the 250th anniversary of our country, bear in mind that, if you've got lodge minutes, those are primary resources.
Right.
And if you've got the stories that have been handed down in the lodge, that doesn't mean that those stories don't have value, but we might not have a provable history in that. So keep those things in mind as you're cataloging your lodge history, even your family history.
And and sometimes even writing it down in the book that by tradition we've had, ex-brother used to stop by and clean the lodge hall or do something interesting. That should be recorded because it's part of a full story. It may not necessarily be true, but as long as you recognize that it's a tradition or something that we've always talked about, writing that down and making a note of that in the book is still valid.
Philadelphia gave us more Masonic history than we could fit into one trip, and we barely scratched the surface. The buildings, the symbols, the men who shaped the craft and the country, they're still here if you know where to look. So we hit a few highlights this time, but there's a lot more of the city of brotherly love to cover. So stick around over the next few weeks because we've got more to show you in Philadelphia. More stops, more stories, more Masonic history, and more things you should think about coming to Philadelphia to see for yourself.